The mix lacks professional polish, Jordan. Artists at this level expect producers who understand commercial sound, my business partner said, dismissing my production work in front of a Grammy-nominated R&B artist and her management team. The artist exchanged concerned glances with her manager, reconsidering their enthusiasm. My partner, Derek Chen, smiled confidently and opened his laptop with practiced authority. Let me play you the track I produced for the Billboard charting artist last month that demonstrates the level of refinement we deliver. I sat in the Los Angeles recording studio control room, watching Derek present music production work that was unmistakably mine. The layered vocal arrangement was mine, developed through hours of session recording and comping. The drum programming with its distinctive swing pattern was mine, crafted beat by beat in the DAW. The bass line that anchored the groove was mine, performed and edited meticulously. Even the creative mixing decisions, the specific EQ choices and compression settings that gave the track its polished commercial sound, came directly from techniques I'd developed and shared with him during our studio partnership. This was the 21st time in 19 months that Derek had stolen my music production work and presented it as his own creative output to artists, labels, or industry professionals. I'd documented every single instance meticulously, building a comprehensive archive of irrefutable evidence. I'd gathered proof through production credits I'd secured directly with artists, original session files with complete metadata and revision histories, detailed production notes, and testimony from session musicians and engineers who'd worked directly with me in the studio. Because what neither Derek nor this Grammy-nominated artist sitting across the mixing console knew was that I'd already secured production agreements with 5 major artists who wanted to work directly with me, not through Matthews Chen Productions. I'd been approached by 3 prestigious record labels about exclusive production deals with significant advances. I'd also consulted extensively with music industry attorneys who confirmed that Derek had absolutely no legal rights to production work I'd created independently, regardless of our business partnership structure or his fraudulent credit claims. In exactly 48 hours, I would dissolve our production company partnership through formal legal channels and reveal publicly that every commercially successful track Derek had been claiming production credit for over the past 19 months was actually my creative and technical work. Every production was documented through original session files showing my work, supported by comprehensive DAW project histories proving authorship beyond any doubt. His production company would lose its entire artist roster overnight. It would lose credibility with labels who'd been told Derek was the lead producer. It would lose its industry reputation built entirely on stolen credits. Mine would launch with the same artists he'd tried to claim, with proper attribution finally restored, and with opportunities he'd deliberately blocked through his systematic exploitation. Before we witness how a talented music producer whose work was stolen for years used production credits and industry relationships to destroy her exploitative partner while launching her own successful production company, I want to thank you for being part of this community. A community that believes creative theft in music deserves the same serious consequences as any other form of stealing. A community that understands production credit fraud should be exposed publicly and punished severely. If you've had your production work stolen by partners or studio owners, if you've watched colleagues claim credit for your tracks, if you've been the invisible creative force behind someone else's production success while they collected credits and royalties that belong to you, this story will resonate deeply. Hit that subscribe button to join thousands of others who appreciate stories where careful documentation and strategic planning overcome exploitation in creative industries. Now let's step into the competitive world of music production where a brilliant producer's work was systematically stolen by her charismatic business partner. Where industry relationships and studio hierarchies enabled ongoing exploitation. Where 19 months of careful preparation and evidence gathering created the foundation for complete professional destruction and creative triumph. My name is Jordan Matthews, and I'm a 31-year-old music producer originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up in a family where music was the primary language of emotional expression and creative identity. My father, Marcus, was a session bassist who played on countless R&B and soul records throughout the 80s and 90s, working with major artists in Atlanta's thriving music scene. My mother, Alicia, was a classically trained pianist who taught music theory at Spelman College. I was surrounded from earliest childhood by discussions about musical arrangement, harmonic progression, rhythmic feel, and the intersection of technical precision with emotional authenticity. I learned about music production when I was 13 years old, spending afternoons in my father's home studio watching him record bass lines and arrange backing tracks for various artists. He taught me systematically about signal flow, microphone techniques, the importance of performance feel versus technical perfection. He explained that great production required understanding not just how to operate equipment but how to capture authentic musical moments, how to make artists comfortable enough to deliver their best performances, how to balance creative vision with commercial viability. Those early lessons in the studio shaped everything about how I approach music production even today. My father emphasized that technical skill was absolutely necessary but fundamentally insufficient for creating impactful music. He'd play me classic records from Motown, Stax, Philadelphia International, explaining how producers like Quincy Jones, Gamble and Huff, and Berry Gordy combined technical excellence with deep understanding of songcraft and artist development. He taught me to think about serving the song and artist, not showcasing production techniques. He taught me to listen critically to arrangement decisions, not just surface sonics. Why did this string part work emotionally? How did the drum pattern support the vocal delivery? What made this bass line anchor the groove effectively? How did dynamics and space create emotional impact? These questions became instinctive, forming the foundation of my production philosophy that music served emotional communication first. My mother contributed the critical music theory perspective to my production education. As a classically trained musician and educator, she possessed deep knowledge of harmonic structure, voice letting, orchestration principles, and compositional techniques across different musical traditions. She taught me that understanding music theory enabled more creative freedom, not less, that theoretical knowledge provided tools for realizing creative visions effectively. She'd sit at the piano analyzing pop songs harmonically, showing me how seemingly simple progressions used sophisticated voice leading and chord substitutions. How melody and harmony interacted to create emotional effects. How different musical cultures approached rhythm, scale systems, and structural organization. These lessons taught me that music production existed within broader musical traditions, that the best producers understood historical context while creating contemporary sounds. I remember one specific project when I was 16 that crystallized these lessons from both parents. A local independent artist asked if I could produce a demo for her, having heard about my growing interest in production. Most teenage producers would have loaded preset sounds and programmed generic beats. I approached it systematically, listening to her songs and influences carefully, discussing what she wanted to communicate emotionally, analyzing reference tracks to understand what musical elements created the effects she valued. I produced a 3-song demo that combined live instrumentation my father helped me record with programmed elements I crafted carefully in Florida studio. I paid attention to arrangement, making sure each musical element served the songs rather than cluttering them. I focused on capturing genuine vocal performances, creating an environment where the artist felt comfortable being vulnerable. I mixed the tracks with attention to emotional impact, not just technical balance. The resulting demo sounded remarkably professional for a 16-year-old's production work. The artist used it to secure management and eventually a development deal with a small label. She credited my production publicly, telling people I'd helped realize her creative vision while maintaining her artistic identity. That validation, at 16, taught me that thoughtful production could elevate artists' work while respecting their creative ownership. I earned a scholarship to Berklee College of Music in Boston, studying music production and engineering in one of the most prestigious programs globally. Berklee was intensely demanding, pushing students to develop both exceptional technical capabilities and sophisticated musical understanding across multiple genres. The program maintained extremely high standards, regularly challenging students who couldn't meet professional-level expectations. Faculty consisted of producers and engineers who'd worked on major commercial releases, bringing current industry practices directly into their teaching. My sophomore-year professor, Michael Rodriguez, had been a Grammy-winning engineer who'd worked at Doppler Studios and Electric Lady, recording sessions for numerous platinum artists. He brought that elite studio experience directly into the classroom, pushing us relentlessly to think about artist psychology, technical problem-solving under pressure, sonic aesthetics, and how production choices affected commercial viability. He taught us that professional music production required balancing artistic vision with commercial realities while maintaining technical excellence. Michael was demanding but extraordinarily generous with students who demonstrated commitment and talent. He'd spend hours reviewing production work, providing detailed critiques that identified both creative strengths and technical problems. He connected promising students with industry contacts, wrote recommendations that opened doors at major studios and labels, and maintained relationships with former students throughout their careers. He became not just a teacher but a mentor whose guidance would prove invaluable years later when I faced exploitation. During junior year, I secured a competitive internship at Tree Sound Studios in Atlanta, one of the premier recording facilities in the South. Tree Sound had hosted sessions for Outkast, T.I., Usher, and countless other major artists who'd defined contemporary hip-hop and R&B. The experience of working where music history was being made currently was absolutely inspiring, showing me what professional excellence looked like at the highest level. I learned about managing complex recording sessions involving multiple artists, songwriters, and producers. Coordinating technical aspects while maintaining creative flow. Problem-solving equipment failures and technical challenges in real time during expensive sessions. Reading room dynamics and knowing when to contribute technically versus staying invisible. The sophistication and professionalism required for production at this level was revelatory. One session during that internship involved assisting on vocal recording for a major R&B artist working on her album. I watched the lead engineer create an environment where the artist felt comfortable enough to deliver emotionally vulnerable performances. He managed technical aspects seamlessly while maintaining focus on capturing authentic moments. He communicated production feedback diplomatically, encouraging better performances without damaging confidence. The psychological and interpersonal skills required for great production work were eye-opening, showing me the craft extended far beyond technical operation. My senior thesis project involved producing a complete EP for an emerging artist, demonstrating comprehensive production capabilities from pre-production through final mastering. I worked with a talented singer-songwriter, developing her songs through collaborative arrangement sessions. I recorded live musicians for organic foundation tracks. I programmed additional elements that enhanced rather than overwhelmed the performances. I mixed and mastered the project to professional commercial standards. The resulting EP showcased both creative vision and technical execution. The production elevated the artist's songs while maintaining her distinctive identity. Every musical choice served emotional communication rather than displaying production prowess. The thesis earned departmental honors and was featured in several music production publications as an example of artist-focused production philosophy. Multiple tracks from the EP won student production awards regionally and nationally. The recognition helped me secure a position at a respected production company immediately after graduation. After graduation, I joined a boutique production company in Los Angeles working primarily with R&B and hip-hop artists. The company had built strong relationships with A&R executives at major labels, producing tracks for both established artists and developing talent. I spent 3 years there, working my way systematically from production assistant to associate producer to lead producer on significant projects. My first major production as lead was a single for an emerging R&B artist signed to a major label. The A&R wanted contemporary production that would work for radio while showcasing the artist's vocal abilities. The challenge was creating something that felt current and competitive without sounding generic or derivative. I developed a production approach that combined live instrumentation with modern programming, creating a sound that felt both organic and contemporary. The single performed exceptionally well, reaching top 20 on R&B charts and generating significant streaming numbers. The label attributed much of the success to production that elevated the artist while maintaining commercial appeal. The track won recognition at several industry award shows, though the production company's owner received primary credit while my contribution was acknowledged only internally within the company. I worked on numerous high-profile productions during those 3 years, steadily developing a distinctive sonic signature that became valued by artists and labels. There was a hip-hop project that balanced hard-hitting beats with melodic elements that broadened appeal. An R&B album that used vintage soul influences in contemporary arrangements. A pop crossover track that combined electronic production with live instrumentation seamlessly. Each project refined my production philosophy and technical capabilities. One project I'm particularly proud of from that period involved producing an entire album for an independent artist with limited budget. The challenge was creating commercially competitive production without expensive studio time or session musicians. I worked efficiently, programming most elements myself while strategically recording only essential live performances. I mixed creatively, using production techniques to create interest and polish without expensive equipment or mixing engineers. The resulting album sounded remarkably professional despite budget constraints. It received critical acclaim in music blogs and publications, with reviewers specifically praising production quality. The artist built a significant independent following, attributing much of their success to production that competed with major label releases. The project demonstrated that creative problem-solving and efficient workflow could overcome financial limitations. By my 3rd year at the production company, I'd become known for delivering polished, commercial-ready productions efficiently while maintaining creative distinctiveness. A&R executives would specifically request me for projects where artists needed producers who understood both artistic development and commercial requirements. I was proud of these contributions and professional recognition, but increasingly frustrated by working within someone else's company where individual producer attribution remained limited by company policies and credit-sharing practices. I wanted to pursue my own creative vision more directly. To work with artists without filtering everything through company hierarchies and approval processes. To build a production discography clearly attributed to me personally rather than absorbed into corporate credits. To control which artists I worked with and how productions developed creatively. I wanted my own production company where I made creative and business decisions independently. At 28 years old, I made the decision to start my own music production company. I had strong technical skills proven across diverse artists and genres. I had a solid track record of commercially successful productions that had charted and won recognition. I had enough industry connections and artist relationships to make independence potentially feasible. What I didn't have was extensive artist management capabilities, established direct label relationships, or the business infrastructure that production companies needed to compete effectively for major projects. I met Derek Chen at a music production conference in Los Angeles during a 3-day industry event focused on emerging production technologies and business practices. He was 38 years old, exceptionally charismatic and seemingly well-connected throughout the music industry. He had an MBA from USC and claimed 15 years of experience in music business development and artist management. He approached me after my panel discussion on contemporary R&B production, saying he'd been specifically looking for a talented producer partner to build a production company focused on developing artists while delivering commercially viable music. We met for coffee the following week. Derek talked enthusiastically and convincingly about his vision for a boutique production company that could compete effectively for major label projects while maintaining creative excellence and artist development focus. He said the market had strong demand for producers who genuinely understood artist development beyond just making beats, but most talented producers either lacked business sophistication or worked through larger companies that limited creative control and took significant percentages. Derek explained extensively how his background in music business had taught him exactly how labels made production decisions and allocated budgets. He understood complex contract negotiations, publishing rights management, producer compensation structures that affected profitability. He knew how to position production services to appeal to A&R executives willing to invest in quality production that would elevate their artists competitively. Over several meetings spanning a few weeks, Derek outlined in detail how a partnership might work operationally. He'd handle all business development, artist management, label relationships, contract negotiation, and company operations. I'd focus entirely on production, working with artists on creative development and managing all aspects of music creation. The division seemed absolutely perfect, allowing me to concentrate completely on creative work while someone else handled business aspects I found less engaging than actual music production. Derek had connections to A&R executives at major labels across hip-hop, R&B, and pop. He understood the complex business infrastructure of music production, including publishing administration and royalty collection. He could handle everything from initial artist acquisition through contract negotiation and rights management. He said my production talent combined with his business expertise and industry connections would create something unique and competitive. The division of responsibilities seemed genuinely ideal and complementary. We formed Matthews Chen Productions as a 50-50 partnership, with both our names appearing equally on all LLC formation documents. Derek handled initial business development while I focused on building our production portfolio and establishing studio capabilities. We secured studio space in Burbank with professional recording and mixing facilities that Derek insisted would impress the major label clients we wanted to attract. The studio was genuinely impressive and well equipped. It featured a large tracking room with professional acoustic treatment, a control room with high-end monitoring and outboard gear, comprehensive microphone collection, and professional DAW workstations running Pro Tools and other production software. Derek insisted on premium facilities and equipment, arguing convincingly that the studio needed to demonstrate production excellence and technical capability to artists and labels accustomed to working at major facilities. We installed comfortable client areas where artists and label representatives could monitor sessions. Professional equipment for recording, mixing, and mastering. A production writing room with keyboards and beat-making setup. The operational foundation appeared absolutely solid and professionally managed. Derek hired a studio manager and session coordinator, bringing professional organizational structure to operations. He designed our branding and marketing materials himself, creating sophisticated visual identity. He set up comprehensive business infrastructure including accounting systems, equipment insurance, negotiated favorable lease terms, created project management systems. Everything seemed properly established. The early months were genuinely productive and exciting. I created extensive production demos across different genres and styles we wanted to pursue, showcasing our capabilities in R&B, hip-hop, pop, and alternative music. I developed complete productions that demonstrated both creative sophistication and commercial polish. Derek would review tracks regularly and provide feedback, always expressing enthusiasm about the work I was producing. He'd bring potential artist clients and label representatives to the studio to hear my production work, presenting these tracks as examples of what we could deliver. I created comprehensive production portfolios demonstrating capabilities across various musical styles and applications. An R&B production showcasing vocal arrangement and harmonic sophistication. A hip-hop track with hard-hitting drums and creative sampling. A pop crossover production that balanced electronic elements with live instrumentation. An alternative R&B piece that pushed creative boundaries while maintaining accessibility. I shared everything openly with Derek during this development phase. I'd walk him through my production thinking comprehensively. I'd explain the technical approaches and creative decisions behind each track. Why I'd chosen certain drum sounds or processing chains. How I'd structured arrangements to support vocal performances. What mixing decisions created the final sonic aesthetic. I thought we were partners genuinely building a company together, that my openness about production processes was normal collaboration between business partners with different expertise areas. Derek would ask detailed questions during these production reviews, showing what seemed like genuine interest in understanding the work beyond surface appreciation. He'd inquire about specific production techniques and how I'd achieved certain sonic effects. About software choices and workflow optimization. About mixing approaches and mastering preparation. I appreciated his engagement, interpreting it as a business partner intelligently learning enough about production to effectively represent our company's capabilities to potential clients. The theft started subtly during early artist meetings, so gradually that I initially didn't recognize it as problematic. Derek would describe productions using language that subtly claimed creative credit without technically lying outright. He'd say, "We produced this track," or, "Our production approach combines," when discussing music I'd created entirely independently through dozens of hours of session work. He'd present tracks without clearly stating that I, specifically, had created every musical element and production decision. The language was ambiguous enough that artists could reasonably assume Derek had been directly involved in production rather than purely business operations. At first, I told myself this was probably normal business communication for partnerships, that using "we" made sense when representing a company collectively. But the pattern became increasingly troubling when Derek started taking artist meetings without me present, returning afterward with signed production agreements where artists apparently believed Derek himself was the lead producer who would be creating their music. The first absolutely undeniable instance of theft involved a major single for a rising R&B artist signed to a major label. The A&R needed contemporary production that would position the artist for crossover success while maintaining R&B credibility. They wanted a track that would work for both urban radio and pop playlists, a challenging balance requiring sophisticated production that served multiple audiences simultaneously. I developed the production over several weeks of intensive work. The foundation was a programmed drum pattern with distinctive swing that felt organic despite being electronic. I recorded a live bass performance that anchored the groove while maintaining contemporary production aesthetics. I created a layered synth arrangement that provided harmonic interest without overwhelming the vocal. I produced the vocal meticulously, comping together the best phrases from multiple takes and creating a background arrangement that enhanced the lead without competing. The mixing process took days of detailed work, balancing all elements to create commercial polish while maintaining dynamic interest. I automated levels and effects throughout, creating movement and evolution that maintained engagement through the entire track. I made countless small decisions about EQ, compression, reverb, and spatial processing that collectively created the final sonic character. The resulting production was exactly what the label needed, striking the difficult balance between R&B authenticity and pop accessibility. Derek attended the final playback meeting with me, positioned as company principal. During the meeting, I walked through the production approach systematically, explaining the creative decisions and technical execution. The A&R and artist were absolutely thrilled with the track and wanted to proceed immediately with release planning. After the meeting ended and we'd said goodbye to the label team, I overheard the A&R mention being impressed by Derek's production vision and his sophisticated approach to contemporary R&B. I realized with growing alarm that Derek had deliberately positioned himself as the actual producer during preliminary conversations I hadn't been part of. The credit theft had moved beyond ambiguous language to outright misrepresentation of creative authorship. The exploitation escalated systematically from there. Derek began regularly taking production meetings without me present, playing my tracks as examples of his own production work. He'd return from these meetings with signed agreements and tell me enthusiastically about projects he'd secured using music I'd created to win artist and label confidence. He was actively performing production expertise he absolutely didn't possess, claiming credit for creative vision and technical skills that were entirely mine. I confronted Derek directly about claiming credit for my production work. He looked genuinely confused by my concern, saying that as equal business partners all company productions were inherently ours, regardless of who had physically created specific tracks. He said I was being unnecessarily territorial about individual attribution, that this thinking was counterproductive to building a successful production company. He suggested my concern about personal credit revealed immaturity about how professional music businesses actually operated. The gaslighting was sophisticated and effective, making me genuinely question whether my perception was reasonable. That evening, deeply troubled, I called my Berkeley mentor Michael Rodriguez. I explained the situation comprehensively, describing Derek's behavior patterns and justifications. Michael listened carefully without interrupting, then delivered a clear assessment. He said he'd seen this exact exploitation pattern before in production companies and studios, where business partners or studio owners systematically exploited talented producers while claiming their work. He explained that production credits were industry currency, that proper attribution was essential for career advancement, and that I should immediately start documenting everything meticulously and protecting my work legally. Following Michael's advice, I began systematically documenting every production I created. I maintained comprehensive session files with all metadata intact. I kept detailed production notes documenting creative decisions and technical approaches. I saved every revision and alternate mix with timestamps. I began deliberately building independent relationships with artists separate from Matthews Chen Productions' business structure. I was methodically gathering evidence while planning my eventual exit. During the next 19 months of documentation, Derek's systematic theft continued and escalated dramatically. He submitted my productions to industry award shows under his name as lead producer. He spoke at production conferences about his creative process, while playing exclusively my tracks as examples. He gave interviews to music publications about his production philosophy, using my work to illustrate supposed innovations. He was building his professional reputation entirely on production work he hadn't created, while I remained invisible despite doing all actual creative and technical work. One particularly egregious instance involved a Grammy submission for a track I'd produced completely independently from initial concept through final mastering. Derek submitted the track for Grammy consideration listing himself as producer without consulting me or including my name on the submission. When the track received a nomination in the R&B category, Derek's name appeared on the nomination announcement as the producer. He attended industry events discussing his Grammy-nominated work, without ever acknowledging my actual authorship. I had to watch him accept congratulations from industry professionals for production work I'd created. He gave interviews about the creative process behind the nominated track, accurately describing technical approaches I'd used while claiming the decisions as his own. The psychological impact was devastating, watching someone receive recognition for your work while you remained completely invisible. The Grammy nomination incident was particularly painful because that track represented some of my best production work. I'd spent weeks developing the sonic concept, experimenting with different instrumental textures and arrangement approaches. The drum programming alone had taken days of careful work, layering multiple elements to create a groove that felt both programmed and organic. I'd recorded live strings myself, playing viola parts and layering them to create lush harmonic beds. The vocal production had required hours of patient session work with the artist, creating an environment where she felt comfortable delivering emotionally vulnerable performances. I'd mixed the track obsessively, making hundreds of small adjustments to create the final polished sound. Every EQ curve, every compression setting, every reverb tail length had been carefully considered and refined. The final master represented the culmination of everything I'd learned about production over years of work. And Derek's name appeared on the Grammy nomination as if he'd created it all. When the nominations were announced, my phone filled with messages from friends and colleagues congratulating me, assuming I'd been nominated. I had to explain awkwardly that my name wasn't on the nomination despite creating the entire production. Several people seemed confused, knowing my production style intimately and hearing it clearly in the nominated track. The conversations were humiliating, having to explain that my business partner had submitted work under only his name. Derek attended the Grammy nomination ceremony, walking the red carpet and doing interviews with entertainment press. He wore an expensive suit and spoke eloquently about his production philosophy and his approach to contemporary R&B. He described the nominated track's creative development accurately because he was recounting my actual process, but he presented it as his own creative journey. Video of his interviews circulated on social media and music industry sites, positioning him as an innovative producer nominated for music's highest honor. I watched these interviews from my apartment, feeling a mixture of rage and profound sadness. That should have been my moment, my recognition for years of dedicated craft development. Instead, I was invisible while someone who'd never created music in his life received credit and accolades. The injustice was overwhelming, but I forced myself to document everything systematically for my eventual legal case. Another incident involved an artist showcase where Derek was invited to present production work and discuss his creative approach with an audience of emerging producers and music industry professionals. The showcase was organized by a prominent production organization and positioned as educational, with established producers sharing insights about their craft and career development. Derek was invited based on the success of tracks in Matthews Chen Productions' portfolio, all of which I'd created. He played several tracks I'd produced, describing the production techniques and creative thinking behind each one in detail. He discussed arrangement decisions I'd made, explaining why certain instruments were used and how they served the songs. He talked about sonic aesthetics I'd developed, describing my mixing approach and mastering preparation. He covered everything accurately because he was simply describing my actual work, but he presented it all as his own creative process and technical expertise. The audience of industry professionals and emerging producers listened respectfully, taking notes and asking detailed questions about his production philosophy. Derek answered questions by rephrasing things I'd explained to him during our partnership, presenting my insights as his own hard-won knowledge. He discussed challenges in music production and how he'd overcome them, describing problems I'd solved and presenting my solutions as his innovations. I attended the showcase and had to sit in the audience listening to Derek claim my creative work publicly and systematically. The experience was surreal and psychologically damaging, watching someone perform expertise they completely lacked while an audience of my peers believed the performance. Several people I knew from Berkeley were present and seemed confused, knowing my production style intimately and hearing it clearly in the demonstrated tracks but seeing Derek claim authorship confidently. One former classmate, a producer I'd collaborated with during college, approached me afterward with obvious confusion. "Jordan, those tracks Derek played sound exactly like your production style," she said carefully. "The vocal arrangement approach, the drum programming aesthetic, even the specific reverb choices are signature elements from your work. Did you work on those productions with him?" I hesitated, torn between honesty and not creating a public confrontation that could damage my exit strategy. "I've worked on Matthews Chen Productions projects," I said carefully, trying to acknowledge my involvement without explicitly calling Derek a fraud in a public setting. My classmate nodded slowly, clearly understanding more than I was saying explicitly. She gave me a meaningful look that suggested she recognized what was happening, then said quietly that she'd always valued my production work and hoped we could collaborate independently sometime. That interaction, while brief, validated that people who knew my work recognized the theft even when Derek performed it convincingly. It also showed me that my production had a distinctive voice, that years of craft development had created recognizable sonic signatures that couldn't be completely hidden by someone else claiming credit. There was also a major label production opportunity where the A&R specifically requested Derek based on hearing tracks from our portfolio that had achieved commercial success. The A&R emailed Derek directly, praising his production work, and asking about his availability for an upcoming project with a priority artist. Derek forwarded me the email excitedly, apparently feeling no guilt about the A&R crediting him for work I'd created. Derek took the initial meeting alone without me, returning to tell me enthusiastically about the high-profile project he'd secured for our company. The artist was a rising star with significant label investment and radio promotion support. The project would be visible and potentially career-defining. Derek explained that the A&R wanted to work specifically with him based on the sonic aesthetic of our previous work, my sonic aesthetic that he was claiming as his own. During pre-production discussions with the artist and creative team, they asked Derek detailed questions about his production approach, creative influences, and technical workflow. Derek gave answers that sounded superficially knowledgeable but contained obvious errors and inconsistencies that any experienced producer would immediately recognize. He described using equipment configurations that weren't physically possible. He mentioned production techniques that contradicted the aesthetic of work he was claiming to have created. He referenced influences whose music sounded nothing like the tracks in our portfolio. The artist's vocal producer, an experienced engineer who'd worked on numerous platinum records, looked increasingly skeptical during Derek's explanations. At one point, he asked Derek a specific technical question about mic placement and preamp choices on a previous production. Derek gave an answer that was completely wrong, describing a setup that would have produced terrible results. The vocal producer's expression suggested he knew something wasn't adding up, but professional courtesy prevented him from challenging Derek directly in front of the artist and label representatives. I had to intervene carefully during actual production sessions, subtly correcting Derek's technical mistakes and redirecting discussions toward productive creative decisions without embarrassing him in front of the clients. When Derek suggested a production approach that wouldn't work, I'd frame alternative suggestions as building on Derek's idea, rather than contradicting him directly. When he made technically incorrect statements about signal flow or processing, I'd quietly demonstrate the correct approach while maintaining the fiction that we were collaborating as co-producers. The artist seemed increasingly confused by the contradiction between Derek's pre-production descriptions and the actual production work happening in sessions. She'd ask questions about techniques Derek had mentioned using on previous tracks, and I'd have to explain that we were taking a different approach for her project while internally knowing that Derek had never used those techniques because he'd never actually produced anything. I produced the entire track myself while Derek performed the role of producer for the client, sitting at the console giving vague directional feedback that I'd translate into actual production decisions. The experience was surreal and professionally demeaning, being the invisible creator of music while someone else received credit and recognition. When the track was completed and the artist expressed excitement about Derek's production, I felt a mixture of pride in the work and deep resentment about the stolen attribution. The session engineer, who'd watched the entire production process, pulled me aside privately after the final session. "That was all you, wasn't it?" he said quietly. Derek didn't actually do any of the production work. I didn't know how to respond without creating professional complications, so I deflected with something vague about collaborative processes. The engineer nodded understandingly, clearly recognizing the truth regardless of what I said explicitly. There was also an industry panel discussion about contemporary R&B production where Derek was invited to participate alongside several genuinely accomplished producers. The panel was broadcast live on a music industry platform and later archived, giving it significant visibility. Derek sat on stage with producers who'd created numerous hit records, presenting himself as their peer despite having never actually produced music. During the discussion, the moderator asked panelists about their creative process and approach to developing artists sonically. Derek described my production process in detail, explaining how he worked with artists to understand their creative vision, how he approached arrangement and sonic aesthetic to serve songs, how he balanced artistic integrity with commercial viability. Everything he said was accurate because he was describing my actual approach, but he presented it as his own developed expertise. Other panelists asked Derek questions about specific technical challenges in production. He gave answers that sounded plausible to a general audience but contained subtle errors that the other producers certainly recognized. I watched the live stream from my apartment, seeing the other panelists exchange quick glances when Derek said things that didn't quite make sense technically. They were too professional to call him out publicly, but their body language suggested skepticism about his claimed expertise. One panelist, a legendary producer I deeply respected, asked Derek about his influences and how he'd developed his sonic signature. Derek mentioned several producers whose work sounded nothing like the tracks in our portfolio, revealing his lack of actual understanding about the music he was claiming to have created. The legendary producer nodded politely but looked unconvinced, clearly recognizing that Derek's stated influences didn't align with the aesthetic of his supposed work. I received messages during and after the panel from colleagues who'd watched, several expressing confusion about Derek's participation. Did Derek actually produce those tracks he's talking about? One producer friend messaged me. They sound exactly like your style, not like anything related to the influences he mentioned. I deflected these questions carefully, not wanting to create drama before I was ready to exit formally, but the messages validated that experienced ears recognized the inconsistencies in Derek's claims. Each instance of theft accumulated psychological damage. Every time Derek claimed credit for my work, I felt a piece of my professional identity being erased. Every award nomination listing only his name, every interview where he described his creative process, every showcase where he presented my productions as his innovations was another instance of professional invisibility despite being the actual creator. The emotional toll became increasingly difficult to manage. I'd wake up with anxiety about going to the studio, knowing Derek would likely steal credit for whatever I produced that day. Every artist meeting where he performed production expertise felt like watching fraud happen in real time while being powerless to stop it without destroying my exit strategy. Every industry event where people congratulated him for my work created anger and frustration that I had to suppress while maintaining professional composure and pleasantness. The constant gaslighting made me question my own perceptions and professional worth. Derek's insistence that his behavior was normal partnership practice, that I was being immature about credit attribution, that successful businesses operated through collective credit rather than individual recognition, created genuine uncertainty about whether my concerns were reasonable. Was I being overly sensitive? Was individual credit attribution actually less important than I thought? Were my expectations about proper authorship unrealistic for partnership structures? My therapist helped me understand that these doubts were the intended effect of gaslighting, that Derek's explanations were designed to make me question my accurate perceptions of what was happening. She helped me maintain clarity that claiming credit for work you didn't create was fraud regardless of business partnership structures, that proper attribution mattered professionally and financially, and that my response to theft was appropriate and justified. The therapeutic support was essential for maintaining psychological stability while continuing to work alongside someone systematically stealing my creative output. During those 19 months of documentation, I was simultaneously building my exit strategy with systematic care and meticulous attention to detail. I maintained comprehensive session files for every production I created, understanding that these files constituted irrefutable technical proof of authorship. DAW project files contained embedded metadata showing creation dates, modification histories, plugin usage patterns, and editing sequences that constituted a unique digital fingerprint impossible to fabricate or replicate. Every automated parameter, every audio region edit, every plugin insertion created timestamps and technical evidence. I archived every alternate mix, every production revision, every creative experiment I'd tried and abandoned. I saved vocal comping sessions showing exactly how I'd assembled final performances from multiple takes. I kept MIDI data for every programmed instrument, showing my specific note choices and timing adjustments. I maintained audio files for every recorded element, preserving the complete production history from initial tracking through final mastering. The comprehensive technical documentation would make any future authorship dispute impossible for Derek to win. I also started securing production credits directly with artists through individual producer agreements, ensuring contracts specified my name personally regardless of company affiliation or Derek's attempts to claim collective credit. I'd have artists sign producer agreements that explicitly acknowledged my specific creative contribution to their projects. These agreements created legal documentation of authorship completely separate from Matthews Chen Productions' business structure, establishing my individual rights regardless of what happened with the partnership. The artist agreements served multiple purposes. They provided legal proof of authorship. They established my personal relationship with artists independent of company infrastructure. They created contractual obligations for artists to credit me properly on releases. Most importantly, they demonstrated to artists that I was the actual producer of their music, not Derek, creating foundation for future independent collaboration. I was careful about how I approached these agreements to avoid alerting Derek prematurely to my exit plans. I'd frame them as normal legal protection for both the artist and producer, explaining that explicit authorship documentation prevented future disputes about credits or royalties. Most artists readily agreed, appreciating the clarity and professional approach. Several mentioned they'd assumed I was the actual producer anyway based on our studio interactions, validating that my role was obvious to anyone paying attention. I gathered detailed testimony from session musicians, recording engineers, and artists who could verify through first-hand observation that I'd created all of Matthews Chen Productions' work. I'd have casual conversations with collaborators after sessions, asking them to describe their perception of who'd done what creatively. I'd document these conversations carefully, creating written records of what people had observed. One session bassist I'd worked with regularly was particularly helpful. After a session where Derek had attended but contributed nothing creatively, the bassist commented, "Derek seems like a great business guy, but you're clearly the producer here. I've never seen him actually make a creative decision or technical contribution." I asked if he'd be willing to provide that assessment in writing if ever needed, explaining I was documenting roles for potential future legal purposes. He agreed immediately, writing a detailed statement about what he'd observed across multiple sessions. Similarly, I cultivated relationships with recording engineers at studios where we'd tracked sessions. Engineers observed everything happening in sessions and would be credible witnesses about who actually produced music. Several engineers commented privately that they'd noticed Derek never made production decisions or demonstrated technical knowledge during sessions, asking diplomatically whether our partnership was primarily business-focused on his side. I confirmed this carefully while asking if they'd be willing to provide statements if needed. Most agreed, understanding the importance of proper credit attribution in music. I began quietly building direct relationships with artists and labels, carefully establishing personal connections independent of company infrastructure Derek controlled. I'd suggest coffee meetings with artists to discuss creative direction for upcoming projects, positioning these meetings as normal producer-artist relationship building while actually creating personal bonds that could transfer when I left the company. I'd share my personal contact information, establishing communication channels completely separate from Matthews Chen Productions' business systems. During these conversations, I'd listen carefully to what artists valued about working with our company. Consistently, they'd describe appreciating my production approach, my ability to understand their creative vision and translate it into polished music, my collaborative process that made them feel heard and supported. They'd mention specific production techniques or creative decisions I'd made that had elevated their work. None of these conversations involved Derek's contributions because he hadn't made any creative contributions. Artists were working with Matthews Chen Productions specifically for my production work, even if they didn't fully realize yet that Derek had no actual production involvement. Several artists told me explicitly during these conversations that they specifically valued my production work and wanted to continue collaborating with me personally on future projects. These statements gave me confidence that artists would transfer their business when I left, that my work had created loyalty independent of company affiliation. I'd document these conversations carefully, noting dates and specific statements that showed artists' intent to continue working with me. I consulted extensively and repeatedly with music industry attorneys who specialized in production credits, rights disputes, and entertainment law. The initial consultation had been revelatory, but I continued meeting with attorneys regularly to ensure my documentation strategy was comprehensive and my exit plan legally sound. The attorney explained that proper production credit in music was both professional currency determining career trajectory and legal documentation affecting royalty rights and future earning potential. Derek's systematic credit theft wasn't just professionally damaging through invisible career impact but was potentially affecting my financial rights to productions I'd created. Production credits determined royalty percentages, affected future opportunities for high-profile projects, and established reputation that commanded higher fees. Every stolen credit represented lost financial value beyond just professional recognition. The legal and financial dimensions strengthened my resolve to document everything with absolute precision. The attorney advised me on specific documentation practices that would be legally bulletproof. Maintain session files with all metadata intact and backed up in multiple secure locations. Create detailed production notes contemporaneously with work, documenting creative decisions as they happened rather than reconstructing them later. Secure artist agreements acknowledging my authorship as close to production completion as possible. Gather witness testimony from credible industry professionals. Build overwhelming evidence that would make any legal challenge from Derek impossible to sustain. We also discussed potential legal claims Derek might make when I left. Breach of partnership agreement, theft of business relationships, interference with company operations. For each potential claim, the attorney explained why it would fail legally and what counter-claims I could make. My comprehensive documentation of Derek's credit theft, combined with my legal right to work with any artists who chose to hire me, created strong legal position that Derek couldn't effectively challenge regardless of how expensive his attorneys might be. I also approached several artists and labels directly about future production projects, carefully testing whether they'd be interested in working with me independently once I launched my own company. I framed these conversations diplomatically and professionally, explaining that I was considering launching an independent production practice and wanted to understand whether there would be market interest in working with me directly. The response was overwhelmingly positive and professionally validating. 5 major artists who'd worked with Matthews Chen Productions committed explicitly to working with me once I launched independently. These weren't casual verbal expressions of interest but actual signed letters of intent specifying upcoming projects and approximate budgets. The artists made clear they'd been working with Matthews Chen specifically because of my production work and wanted to continue that creative relationship regardless of business structure changes. These commitments provided crucial financial security for my transition period, ensuring I'd have immediate revenue when leaving rather than starting completely from scratch financially. 3 major record labels also expressed serious interest in exclusive or first-look production deals. Label executives I'd built relationships with said they valued my production aesthetic and consistent delivery of commercial quality work. They wanted to secure my services for their priority artists, offering advances and minimum project guarantees that would provide financial stability during my independent launch. These commitments were negotiated carefully and documented in term sheets, creating legally binding obligations contingent only on my independent availability. The financial commitments were psychologically crucial beyond their monetary value. They validated that my work had significant market value independent of Derek or Matthews Chen Productions. They proved I could succeed independently without his supposed business expertise or industry connections. They demonstrated that the relationships and reputation I'd built were personally mine, not company assets Derek could claim ownership over. This validation strengthened my confidence to proceed with partnership dissolution despite Derek's likely arguments that I needed him to succeed professionally. I began preparing comprehensive operational infrastructure for my independent production company meticulously and systematically. I researched studio space options throughout Los Angeles, evaluating facilities based on acoustic quality, equipment availability, location accessibility for artist sessions, and monthly costs that would be sustainable for an independent operation. I visited dozens of potential spaces, taking detailed notes and comparing options carefully. I investigated equipment needs and associated costs for running a professional production company independently. I created detailed spreadsheets listing every piece of equipment I'd need to purchase or lease, from audio interfaces and microphones to monitoring systems and acoustic treatment. I researched vendors and negotiated preliminary pricing for bulk purchases. I developed realistic budgets showing equipment costs, monthly operating expenses, and revenue requirements for financial sustainability. I consulted with accountants who specialized in music industry businesses about optimal entity structures and tax implications of different approaches. We discussed LLC versus S corporation structures, tax advantages of various accounting methods, retirement planning strategies for self-employed creative professionals, and insurance requirements. The financial planning was detailed and conservative, ensuring I understood all costs and obligations before committing to independence. I developed comprehensive business plans and financial projections showing my independent practice could be financially sustainable and eventually profitable. The projections incorporated the committed artist projects and label deals as guaranteed initial revenue, then modeled growth scenarios based on different assumptions about client acquisition and project volume. Even conservative scenarios showed clear financial viability, giving me confidence the independent venture could succeed economically. The preparation also included building professional brand identity and digital presence for my independent practice. I worked with a designer friend to create sophisticated branding for Jordan Matthews Productions that would position my practice as established and professionally capable rather than appearing like a startup. We developed logo designs, color palettes, typography systems, and visual identity standards that conveyed creative excellence and technical professionalism. I built a comprehensive website showcasing my production work with proper attribution finally restored. The portfolio section featured tracks I'd produced with detailed descriptions of my creative approach and technical execution. I included artist testimonials praising my production work specifically. I created case studies showing production process from initial concept through final delivery. The website communicated that I was an accomplished producer with extensive experience and proven commercial success. I prepared comprehensive portfolio presentations for different contexts, from quick PDF overviews for initial artist meetings to detailed multimedia presentations for label pitches. I drafted producer agreements and work for hire contracts based on industry standard templates my attorney reviewed. I established business banking relationships and accounting systems. I set up project management software for tracking sessions and deliverables. Everything was professionally organized and ready to activate immediately upon leaving Matthews Chen Productions. I created detailed transition plans for how I'd handle the actual departure operationally. Which equipment belonged to me personally versus partnership purchases. How I'd extract my session files and production archives without violating any legitimate company interests. What timeline would minimize disruption while protecting my interests. How I'd communicate the transition to artists and industry contacts. The planning was meticulous, anticipating potential complications and developing solutions proactively. I also prepared psychologically for the confrontation I knew was coming. I practiced explaining my decision calmly and professionally. I prepared responses to arguments Derek would likely make. I mentally rehearsed maintaining composure if he became angry or tried emotional manipulation. I reminded myself repeatedly that I was doing nothing wrong, that protecting my work and career was legitimate and necessary, that Derek's theft was the actual ethical violation requiring correction. After exactly 19 months of systematic documentation and preparation, I had everything needed to leave successfully. Comprehensive session files proving authorship. Direct production agreements with artists. Industry relationships willing to transfer. Financial commitments ensuring immediate revenue. Legal counsel prepared to defend against any claims Derek might make. I scheduled a meeting with Derek to dissolve our partnership. I chose a Monday morning, selecting a time when our studio assistant would be out. I arrived early with my attorney, Sarah Kim, who specialized in music industry disputes. Her presence signaled this wasn't normal business discussion. I also brought Marcus Thompson, a producer colleague serving as independent witness. Derek arrived looking surprised and concerned to see 3 people waiting. "Jordan, what's happening? Why are lawyers here?" His voice carried unusual anxiety. I gestured for him to sit. "Derek, I'm formally dissolving our partnership effective immediately. I'm also informing you that I'll be pursuing action regarding your systematic theft of production credits and fraudulent misrepresentation of authorship." His face showed shock, confusion, then defensive anger. "What are you talking about? This is insane. We're partners. We built this company together." I slid the prepared dossier across the table. "This contains documentation of 21 instances where you fraudulently claimed production credit for tracks I created. It includes session files with metadata proving I created every production in Matthews Chen Productions catalog. It contains production agreements with artists acknowledging my authorship. It includes witness testimony confirming I created all our company's work." Derek opened the folder, flipping through pages with growing alarm. Copyright documentation, session file metadata reports, artist agreements with my name, witness statements, award submissions showing only his name on my work. "This is ridiculous," he said weakly. "We're partners. All company work is collective. You're being territorial about credits." Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, I'm Sarah Kim, Ms. Matthews' attorney. I need to correct misunderstandings about production credits. Production authorship isn't determined by business partnership but by actual creative contribution. Session files prove Ms. Matthews created every production in your company's catalog. Your partnership agreement doesn't transfer creative authorship." Derek looked between Sarah and me. "Jordan, you can't just walk away. We have artist contracts, label obligations. You're destroying what we built." "I've consulted with 5 artists we've worked with," I said calmly. "They've agreed to work directly with me through my new production company. They were working with Matthews Chen specifically because of my production work. They've committed in writing to continue collaborating with me." His face flushed. "You went behind my back? Stole my artists? That's completely unethical." "Your artists?" I kept my voice even. "Derek, you don't create any music. You've never produced a single track for this company. Every production in our portfolio was created by me. The artists aren't yours. They work with producers who create their music." "I built the business infrastructure," Derek argued. "I secured the deals. I negotiated contracts. I created systems that let you focus on production. This company wouldn't exist without my contributions." "Your contributions don't include creating music," I said. "And they definitely don't include fraudulently claiming production credits." Page 18 documents your Grammy submission listing yourself as producer on a track I created entirely independently. Derek found the page, hands trembling. He read the Grammy submission documentation proving he'd claimed sole production credit. "You submitted my work for Grammy consideration under your name," I continued. "You attended industry events discussing your Grammy-nominated production. That's not ambiguous business communication. That's deliberate fraud." "I can explain," Derek said, struggling. "The way I handled credits might have been unclear, but I never intended." "You intended exactly what happened," I interrupted. "You systematically positioned yourself as the creative force while I created all the work. You built your reputation on productions you didn't create. That's credit theft." Derek stood abruptly. "Fine. Leave. But you're not taking my artist relationships. Not taking my studio infrastructure. And definitely not taking equipment I purchased." Sarah pulled out another document. "This inventory lists equipment Ms. Matthews is removing. Only items she personally purchased or acquired for her use. She's leaving all partnership-purchased equipment." Regarding artist relationships, Sarah continued, "Artists have freedom to work with whichever producer they choose. There's no enforceable non-compete. Any interference with Ms. Matthews' independent artist relationships would constitute tortious interference. Derek sat down heavily, looking defeated. Jordan, please, let's discuss this reasonably. We can restructure the partnership. I'll ensure you get proper production credits going forward. We can rename the company Jordan Matthews Productions with me handling business. I'll adjust revenue split. Whatever you want. I don't want restructured partnership, I said. I want proper credit for my work. I want the career I've earned through actual production, not filtered through someone stealing credit. I've already registered my own production company. I'm leaving today. You'll fail without me, Derek said angrily. You think you can handle artist management? Label negotiations? Contract administration? You're a producer, not a businessperson. I've been handling artist relationships successfully while you stole credit, I replied. The artists and A&Rs I've worked with know who created the productions they value. They're working with me specifically to continue collaborating. Derek's expression turned threatening. I'll sue for breach of partnership. For stealing proprietary relationships. For business damages. Sarah looked unconcerned. Any legal action will result in public exposure of your systematic credit theft. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable. We have session files, artist testimony, industry witnesses. We're prepared to countersue for damages from credit misappropriation affecting Ms. Matthews' career opportunities and royalty rights. Derek's face went pale, understanding his legal exposure. The anger drained away, replaced by visible fear. What do you want? He asked quietly. Sign the partnership dissolution agreement, I said. Acknowledge in writing that I created all productions in Matthews Chen Productions catalog. Agree not to claim credit for my work going forward. Contact award organizations and publications where you claimed my work and issue corrections. If you comply, Sarah added, Ms. Matthews will forego pursuing damages. But future misrepresentation will result in immediate legal action. Derek read the dissolution agreement slowly, hand shaking. He picked up the pen, hesitated, then signed. I watched him sign the document ending our partnership and acknowledging the truth. Marcus Thompson witnessed, documenting Derek's voluntary agreement. I'm gathering my equipment today, I said. My personal recording gear, software licenses, and session archives. I'm leaving partnership purchased equipment and the studio. Derek didn't respond, staring at the signed agreement, processing that his production company had lost its entire creative foundation. I spent hours packing my equipment. My audio interfaces, microphones, MIDI controllers. My software and plugin licenses. My hard drives with all session files and archived work. Several session musicians I'd worked with helped load equipment, commenting they'd known I created all the company's work and were glad I was getting proper credit. By afternoon, I'd removed everything belonging to me. I took one last look at the studio where I'd created so much music Derek had stolen credit for, then walked out permanently. Within 1 week, I'd launched Jordan Matthews Productions from new studio space in Los Angeles. The space was smaller but adequate for my needs. I installed my equipment and immediately began working on projects for the 5 artists who'd committed to working with me. The industry response was swift and decisive. Artists and labels I'd worked with understood immediately what had happened. A&Rs who'd valued my production work transferred collaborations to Jordan Matthews Productions without hesitation. The committed artists became my first major clients, providing immediate revenue. Derek's reputation collapsed overnight once truth emerged. Industry colleagues learned he'd systematically stolen credit from his black female business partner and producer. Publications issued corrections. Award organizations were informed of fraudulent submissions. Matthews Chen Productions lost artists rapidly as word spread about credit fraud. Several artists and engineers publicly confirmed my account, describing watching Derek claim credit for work I'd created. Their testimony eliminated any ambiguity. The music industry response was harsh and unforgiving. Credit theft is among the most serious ethical violations in music where attribution determines career trajectory. Within 6 months, Matthews Chen Productions closed permanently. Derek attempted to continue independently, but no credible artist would work with him after exposure of his fraud. His music industry career was finished. The studio space was released. Equipment was sold. The infrastructure became worthless without creative talent. Meanwhile, Jordan Matthews Productions flourished immediately. I completed productions for committed artists. I won production awards with proper attribution restored. I spoke at industry events about production and protecting creative credits. The recognition I deserved finally arrived. I began advocacy helping other producers protect their work. I developed resources about production credits, documentation practices, and recognizing exploitation. I spoke at production schools about my experience. I mentored young producers facing similar situations. 5 years later, I published a book about production credits and rights that became industry standard. The book combined practical guidance with case studies including my experience. Production schools began assigning it. Derek's fraud became a widely known cautionary tale. His name became synonymous with credit theft. The severity of his professional destruction served as warning to others. 8 years after dissolving our partnership, I received a Grammy for Producer of the Year, recognizing both my production excellence and advocacy for proper attribution. The recognition validated that transforming exploitation into advocacy created positive outcomes beyond personal success. During my acceptance speech, I spoke about documentation importance, production credits as career currency, and industry accountability for credit theft. I encouraged producers facing exploitation to document systematically, consult attorneys early, and understand their rights. The standing ovation suggested the message resonated deeply. Today, Jordan Matthews Productions operates as one of the most respected production companies, working regularly with major artists across genres. My work has been featured extensively. I've produced tracks that have won numerous awards with my name properly attached. I've built exactly the career I envisioned, creating music I'm proud of while maintaining complete creative control and proper attribution. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome is systemic change my advocacy helped create. Music industry organizations now emphasize production credit education. Publications regularly cover credit theft issues. Contracts have evolved to protect producers better. Young producers today have better resources and awareness than I did. That's the ultimate outcome when systematic exploitation meets someone talented enough to succeed independently, patient enough to document everything comprehensively, and committed enough to transform personal justice into broader advocacy. Derek Chen destroyed his career through his own theft. I built mine on music I actually created, protected by industry standards designed to defend creative workers from exactly the exploitation I experienced.